How's it going, lads? So this is another video in the series of me meeting a local historian and exploring the history in that area. In the previous episode I went around with Colm O'Rourke in Carlow and Wicklow. Before that I met Tom Hennessy and we went around South Tipperary. And this time I'm meeting Barry Lacey and we're exploring some of the history in Ferns in County Wexford. Barry Lacey is the historian in residence for Wexford's Decade of Centenaries programme, and he's also the tour guide of Ferns Rebel Walking Tours. I'm going to leave a link down below to the Ferns Rebel Walking Tour if you want to book a tour for yourself, and I'm also going to link his social media channels below too. In this video, Barry is taking me around Ferns in County Wexford and we're exploring everything from 1798 to 1916 history, War of Independence, Civil War and more. Thanks a million to Barry again for taking me around on this tour. He's an absolute wealth of knowledge in the area. And if you want to book a tour with Barry yourself, I'm going to leave the link down below to the Ferns Rebel Walking Tour.
So you can see there's a sign there that says, "This here lies the remains of Dermot MacMurrough, King of Leinster." So traditionally this is where a lot of people say he was buried. Now I suppose the problem with that is this is a base of a high cross, so it dates from a lot earlier than when Dermot died, and usually he would have been most likely buried actually inside in the remains of the Augustinian Abbey, which he founded himself. He probably would have got location up near the chancel or up around the altar area. But I like to start here because it's probably one of the earliest or possible graves inside here in the graveyard. But there's graves here going from the early 1700s. There's around 800 and something recorded names in the graveyard, but like this is from the early medieval period as well, this site, so you could probably double that very easily, like. Yeah. And then for everyone that has a headstone, there's probably more that don't have a headstone as well. So you're talking well over 1,000 people that are buried here, and they're all from different periods: medieval period, 1798, War of Independence, Civil War. But I can come and show you some of them now. One of the most famous probably is the burial place of Father John Murphy, or where part of his remains are supposed to be buried. So that's just over across the way here. Okay. From what my understanding of it is, the story goes essentially that part of his remains were taken back from Tullow. I've heard one that says it was his head that was put on a spike. Yeah. It was taken, some say, by a cousin or maybe his sister, but some sort of family connection, and then it was brought back here and interned in Ferns, because this is the parish where he was from. Like, he was from the town in Tincurry, which is a short distance outside of the village here, and he's supposed to be buried beneath the grave here of another priest. So this is it here. So Father John Murphy, C.C. Boulavogue, local leader 1798, born in Curry Ferns 1753, executed Tullow July 1798. And they say his part remains are buried here. But where he was born and reared is about maybe a mile as the crow flies from where I'm from. Right. And just talking to a local man from there, he was always told that growing up as well, that his remains were brought back and buried in Ferns, but they said it was done in the family graveyard, so maybe in the family plot here inside in the village. So you can't be 100% sure really, like, but I suppose it would make sense. Like, you really hear an awful lot about the people in '98 and great extent, and a lot of trouble was gone to bring back their remains, like in what was dangerous times. So for a man that was so important at the time, it wouldn't be unusual, it seems, for someone to go and to make that effort, like. Yeah, absolutely. But there's another, brought a bit of information with me as well about this. So this is probably one of the best books you'll get on Father John. It's written by a local historian in County Wexford, Nicholas Furlong. Okay. He passed away there recently actually, but he was a wealth of knowledge about the man. But he was from Tincurry, born 1753. I think it was from a family of 5, but they were doing well as farmers. They farmed 70 acres. The father had a bacon curing job along with that as well. And sure, you were talking to Colin, and he said, you know, he went and he studied for the priesthood inside in Ferns, and then, or in Spain, sorry, and then his bodyguard was over just across the other side of the river in the townland of near Tongaro as well.
Okay.
But yeah, no, this is a big place for him here now as well. And now, if you can read the headstone, it's hard to read sometimes. This headstone is this is actually the burial place of a father. So Father Ned Redmond, he was parish priest, I believe, or a priest here in Ferns, or from the local area. And Father Murphy's parish remains are supposed to be buried here. But there's a story that he was in France on a hunting trip, and the famous Napoleon was supposed to be on this trip as well. This is long before his military career, and there was a bit of an incident where Napoleon, I believe, fell into a ditch or got injured in some shape, form or another, and Father Ned is actually credited with saving his life. And so that you can imagine changed the course of history then, like. So two very famous people that are buried just beneath here in the one spot. Now there's other graves here from 1798, so that's of a well-known individual, Father Murphy. If the weather was nice and you come here in the morning on a sunny day in particularly, it's good because you get the sun at a great angle to the headstones.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous graveyard actually, isn't it?
It's lovely. It's well kept as well. So you might have to get down on your hunkers to see this now. But it goes, here lies the body of, I think it's Andrew or Fellin, departed this life 1783, age 48, or age 48 years. Also, alias Murphy, departed 1806. So, typical with any sort of headstone, you're seeing here that there's a bit of a chronology behind it. You know, one, the earliest is 1785, then you have 1806. But if you go to the next one, this is where it gets interesting, because it goes also, it's very hard to make out the name. I can't make out the first name, but it's Fenelon. But it says May the 30th, 1798, age 23. So what you have here is you have the two. This was actually added a lot later on compared to the other two. But if you look at the date, May the 30th, 1798, the rebellion here kicked off around that time here in County Wexford. So very likely a young man of that age, that period, was probably associated with the rebellion. But maybe his name wasn't added to the headstone for years later, just for maybe fear of what might have happened. Like, people didn't talk about that for years afterwards, and even in the year after, like, there was still church burnings and all going on locally, like. So and we don't have any record, I think, of this man, bar what's written here, like. So there's a couple of others in the graveyard as well. Some of them we know where the headstones are, others we don't. There's one recorded of a surname Bryan, B-R-I-E-N. Could be a variation of O'Brien, but that has erected in memory of his father and two sons. And if you look at the dates as well, again 1798. So a father and two sons killed during the rebellion, like. So there's a lot of that, and I start off here talking about that because you have famous people and you have people who we hardly have any record of here as well, like. But there's other burials here from the War of Independence period as well. So one of the first deaths associated with the time here is in just a short throw from here. So all these are within like a short couple of steps, really, as you just seen. And this is a man by the name of Edward Nolan, and I'll come over and show you his grave. You'll see one of the last names at the bottom there. It says Edward Nolan died August, and the date 1919 there. So
August 1919.
Yeah, so just a couple of months into the War of Independence. Towards the end of the first year of it. But this is a picture of him here. So he's this middleman here. So you can, judging by or guessing by the lads look fairly young at the time, so he was probably maybe in Fianna Éireann
Okay.
at the time when this was taken. He was from the townland of Askinamo, short distance outside here. He was involved in the 1916 Rising.
Okay.
He was actually arrested and interned in prison for a couple of weeks or maybe up to 2 months the year prior to his death, because Seamus Rafter, he was a prominent leader in 1916. He was killed when he was making explosives in Enniscorthy, and there's a statue, a monument to him inside the town there. But at his funeral, a lot of people wore the volunteers' uniforms, and Edward was one of them, and he was arrested because of that.
Right.
And interned. But his death is interesting because when you think about this period, you think people passed away by ambushes or raids or shootings, or maybe indirectly as a result of fighting. But he actually lost his life by drowning. So he was in Enniscorthy in August, and he was camping out there with a couple of friends, and he was working inside in the town. And he just went swimming one morning, and he didn't come back. And the lads went looking for him, and unfortunately they found his body. But if you read in the details of his funeral, it was a huge funeral. They brought his coffin out. He was waked inside in Enniscorthy town for maybe a day or so, brought out to the family home here, and it's probably about a mile or two up the road, and he was carried on the shoulders of the lads for the volunteers right down in here. The tricolour in his uniform is draped over the coffin. And then you read the final part in the newspaper, and it says that they fired a volley of shots over the grave with revolvers, which was a dangerous thing to do at the time, like,
Yeah.
considering the RIBC barracks at the time would have been within sight just up the road here, like.
Okay.
And for kind of a county that was relatively quiet for the start of the War of Independence, like. But he's interesting. He was a very young man at the time. He was only 21 years of age when he passed away.
And he was a veteran of 1916 as well.
Yeah, I believe he was involved in some shape or form.
Yeah, probably down in Wexford.
Yeah, probably most likely in Enniscorthy or in Ferns here as well.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about Ferns was one of the locations outside of Dublin that was involved in 1916. And Ferns is sort of a bit of a claim to fame as well, in that Enniscorthy prides itself with being one of the locations that flew the tricolour as well. But there's 2 references in the witness statements from it being flown here in Ferns as well when they took over the RIC barracks.
Okay.
So they sent a detachment of the volunteers from Enniscorthy out to Ferns here, and they took control of the town just for the 2 days of what was left of the rising here. And they found in the RIC barracks, I think it was a telegraph they had at the time saying that there'd be an enormous force needed to suppress the rebellion. But it was short-lived here in Wexford and was relatively peaceful. But it's just a bit of history that a lot of places don't have. Going into the War of Independence, there was an incident here involving a man by the name of James Dunn, and he was actually shot by an RIC constable in July 1920. And again, kind of the county things were kicking off in early 1920, but this had a big impact, like, especially with regards to the view of the RIC and everything else at the time. And he was an innocent man as well. Like, he just went in for a drink, and an incident ensued. But I can tell you the rest over. The pub is actually still there today.
Okay, brilliant.
So one of the major events that happened here in early July 1920, there was 2 constables in the village. One by the name of, I believe it was Connolly or O'Connell, but the main character that we're going to be talking about is a man by the name of Henry Lenihan. So he was actually a Cork man. And the reports go at the time that they had been drinking in the town after they finished up that morning. And by the time they got to Dunbars, they were well on. The pub is still actually there today. You can see it at the corner there. But essentially what happened, Danny, was the newspaper reports at the time said they went in and they asked for a drink, and they had a good bit at this stage, so they were refused, and they sort of helped themselves.
Yeah.
And they were there drinking on to the night, and it was about 9 o'clock at night, and a man by the name of James Dunn, he was a miller from Ballinatray out near Courtown, and he was working at the time, I believe, in Bulgers, which is all these buildings here, and they had a mill. I think it was either here or down, it could have been down below in Milltown actually, which is just a short stone's throw from the village. And there was an altercation occurred where Henry Lenihan went to Dunn and he agitated him, and a bit of a scuffle happened inside. Dunn walked out the door. He was pursued by Lenihan. A fight broke out. Dunn got the better of him, knocked him to the ground. And this is just outside the red window thereabouts. And the story goes that Dunn got up and was walking away. And Lenihan was he was intoxicated and he was enraged at this. So they said he got his revolver and he went to fire. And, sorry, actually before he fired, he demanded Dunn to get down on his knees, and Dunn refused and said, I'm not dealing with you, I'm walking away from you. And he went to fire his revolver, and nothing happened. So then he fixed it, he ran up behind him, put his arm around his neck, and he shot him at point blank range. And even in the court case afterwards, the doctor said that he looked and there was singe marks on his clothes, like that's how close he was when he was actually fired on. But he staggered across the road to what was known as Brothers Walls, and he was attended to by a priest and a local doctor, but he passed away from his wounds. And they found Lenihan afterwards up in the barracks, asleep with his head on the table like this. And when the local sergeant or constable who in charge came in, he raised his head, he said it was covered in blood. So he got 7 years penal servitude for that afterwards, and I can't exactly trace what happened to him afterwards. The last reference I have to him was that he was being deported from the country around, I think it was Christmas 1921, but I haven't been able to see what happened to him afterwards, whether he spent prison time. He was in Waterford for a while and maybe he got transferred further elsewhere then. That's what happened a lot of the time. A lot of the lads were sent over to Dartmoor. That happened in Wexford before. A couple of IRMA men were sent over there after an incident down in Salt Mills. So, but it's another part of the story. Hopefully I'll be able to tell you another day.
Yeah, brilliant.
It's not live or anything, don't worry. And I'll show you this then. And you'll see one is a lot heavier than the other.
Yeah, it's a lot heavier.
So the one you're holding in your hand, the green one, that's a British Mills bomb. Or a grenade, in other words.
This one on the right is?
This one on the right is.
Oh, yeah.
That's standard what the British Army would have had at the time. What you're holding, the rusty one, is an IRA grenade.
Okay.
So that came from a munitions factory down in Cork, actually. But the reason I'm showing you that here is because of what happened here, just at this junction below you. So.
This junction down here at the roundabout?
Yeah. So on the 4th of April, 1921, there was an ambush here. A man by the name of Joseph Killeen, he was in charge of the local IRA column, and himself, a man by the name of Stephen Pender, Lark Connors, and I believe Tom Dwyer. I'll double check those names with you so you can have them. Yeah. But this bank building wasn't here at the time. There was described as a high wall here, and the barracks is only up the road here now. It's a short distance from where we are.
The RIC barracks was up here?
Yeah.
Okay.
And what happened was there was a patrol of, they described them as RIC in black and tans, and came down along the Enniscorthy road here. Now one account says that they were escorting a mail cart, and the other one says that there was just an ordinary patrol. Probably just an ordinary patrol because the newspapers didn't make any reference to the mail cart. That was in one of the witness statements. But Joseph at the time, all he had on him was a revolver with like a handful of bullets, 3 or 4 bullets, and he had a grenade. So what they did was they waited for the RIC to get so close, and then they lobbed the grenade over the wall, and it landed right in the middle of them. Now, the RIC were lucky because they were walking 2 lines apart at distance from one another, so in case if they were clumped together they were an easier target. But they described then as how just essentially mayhem and hell broke loose in the village, and there was firing back and forth. They made their way up to the RIC barracks. They sent out flares through the fireplace in the chimney. That was apparently standard practice at the time. It was that if there was a local patrol in the area, they'd see the flares and they'd come and be able to give aid to the lads then. But it's just significant in the sense that it was right here in the middle of the village and it was right on the doorstep of the RIC at the time. And the fact that they had very little ammunition, like really a grenade and only a handful of bullets is all Joe Killeen had.
Yeah.
But it's a common thing at the time, you know. They were short on ammunition, lack of arms, but they weren't. That didn't stop them,
yeah.
Obviously as well. Like, and that was in April 1921. So it was just near towards the end of the War of Independence.
Yeah.
But the place changed an awful lot since then. But it's just another little event that happened here in the village at the time. There was no casualties, no injuries or anything like that. The lads were lucky, very lucky. The lads' names were Stephen Pender, William Bill Kavanagh, Tom Dwyer, and a man by the name of Lar Connors, I believe. Or it's the witness statement spell it as H-R-A, Har Connors, but I think that could have been a typo, probably Lar Connors.
And this ambush in particular, is there a name on it? What's it known as?
Nope,
ambush,
there's no name on it at all. There's very little reference to it actually.
Right.
I came across it in the newspapers one day.
Wow.
But it wasn't the only thing in the village now. There was, I can take you around, I could show you where the RIC barracks was. That was attacked at least twice during the time.
Okay, brilliant, yeah.
So, that location there, you see that new building?
Yeah.
So that was the site of the courthouse, the former courthouse in the village. But after the shooting of Dunn by Lenihan down the road, they wanted to use the courthouse for the trial. But it was being used by the local doctor at the time, the dispensary doctor. So he essentially said, look, I don't have enough room here for both this to be going on. So they actually held it in the schoolhouse, the building which is incorporated into the modern school today. And that has an interesting history because that was used in 1916 as a how's it going? It was used in 16 as a makeshift hospital by coming on, and also sort of a place for the lads to billet. And it was used as the courthouse for Lenihan's hearing, and it was a temporary prison during the Civil War when the Free State took back control of the town. They put upwards of probably 30 or more anti-treaty forces inside it.
Okay.
And you read newspapers, they described how the lads, they said, wrecked the building. But again, you know, you have to look at more than one reference. It's like they were probably just giving the lads maybe a bad name.
Yeah, yeah.
But the RIC barracks was just in front of the courtyard there.
In front of that courtyard building there?
Yeah. So actually, I'll take you around here just to show you. It was roughly around here. We have some photos of it. So this is just a typical barracks from the time. This is a fantastic photo. I think it was up around the west of Ireland. But you can see these buildings essentially became small fortifications. And you can piece together what this would have looked like during the period. So this is a photograph around the 1970s, 80s maybe. So what we're doing is we're looking up the street here now.
Oh, we're looking this way.
Yeah. So you can see this building here is what was the post office then is now the RIC barracks.
Yeah.
Or pardon me, is now the Garda barracks. But the police barracks the RIC barracks was here. So this wall here is just in front of us. So we're standing in back a bit where the front door was.
Oh yeah, okay.
It was a 2-story building. We have another photograph from the castle. So this is looking back down the way. This is the courtyard here. And you can see the way the roof on it was sort of a double roof.
Yeah.
Hipped. Now one thing the lads did during the war was, and they did this in Clonroach in the first barrack attack, but they lobbed explosives or incendiary devices on top of the roof, the idea being that they'd blow a hole in the roof and then they'd be able to put more stuff in on the lads inside.
Okay.
But they learned after Clonroach, and the barrack here was described as being, the windows were sandbagged, there's a heavy steel door on the front. They'd never ever used the front door to go in, they always used the back door. There was steel shutters with loopholes on the windows, so lads were easily see out, but very hard to target anything inside. And they had metal caging over the roof, because that roof would have been perfect for something to just naturally fall and land in the middle of it and create a hole. It was like a death trap nearly, like, you know, architecturally speaking for the war. But they put caging around that to try and avoid that. And you probably had maybe barbed wire entanglements here as well.
Okay.
But this was the RAC barracks from at least the early 1900s, 1901 census. This is where it is anyway.
So they were very close. That ambush was fairly close to the RAC barracks. So
Just you can even see the bank building down there. That's where
it right there.
the lads were hidden in the wall behind that. That's what the witness statements describe.
And we're standing where the RAC barracks was, so you can see where it happened nearly from here.
Exactly, and the lads didn't have an obstruction from the church there either. They had a clear view all the way down to see there, like. But the barracks was attacked on the 2nd of July 1921. There was a man by the name of James O'Toole. He was in command of what was the North Wexford Flying Brigade column at the time. Two of the captains, Miles Breen, who was a Ferns man, and Patrick Kenny, who was from Ballycarney, they were out in training. So the witness statements say that James decided to attack the barracks here in Ferns. And on that night they set up several locations. They were located down the road where Centra was there. There was a high wall. The lads in preparation set up barrels and planks. They took up position in one of the buildings across the road, probably the courtyard. And behind us here, this car park area was green field. There was a hedge running up along it. Okay. And somewhere over along here, probably further up the street as well. And this is where things get a bit sort of different accounts, because the witness accounts differ from the newspaper reports. One of the witness statements says that they did it when they waited for the church bell to strike. But the newspaper reports say that it happened at around 2 o'clock in the morning. So the lads are probably saying that it happened at 12 midnight, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Because I doubt very much the church bell was ringing every hour at night, like wake everyone, the whole bloody town up. But they set a mine against the gable of the building, hoping that it would blow a massive hole in it. Okay. But luckily for the lads inside, that failed to go off. And what happened then essentially was, they said, right, we're going to attack anyway. It lasted for about 10-15 minutes according to the official Dublin Castle reports. And there was no injuries or anything like that on either side. But there was thatched houses up along here, and the newspaper reports describing how one poor devil found a bullet hole in his bedroom where a bullet went straight through the thatch apparently. So he was lucky and fortunate enough. But there's nothing here of the building anymore. But I'll show you, we're lucky enough in one sense. We have some of the other buildings nearby from that period. Okay. But I was just here one day and I was looking around, and if you notice over the windowsill here, so look at the grand windowsill over there. Now what do you notice in it? See it there?
Oh, that?
Yeah.
It's a bullet hole, obviously, is it?
Possibly. Can't say for certain, but you think of what went on here, like, and there's a lot of fighting in the Civil War as well. It could possibly be like it's like almost spread out. So, but it's the only thing, sort of maybe from that time here. Like it's just like a nice connection.
Yeah.
This is now the Garda Barracks. That was a post office at the time. So in 1916, the lads took control of the village here, the volunteers. They took control of the barracks. The schoolhouse behind me here, you can actually see on the wall, see Ferns National School. Yeah. Taken over by the volunteers in 1916.
That's on the plaque, is it?
Yeah, that was put up for the centenary. And that building there was the post office. And I think they found a telegram inside in there which said that a large force would be needed to suppress the volunteers. But this was the outpost towards Dublin. They were going to march in Dublin from here. And they went to Camolan, just where we had the breakfast this morning actually. And when they got that far, they came across a train which had some British soldiers on it. Now I don't think they were there to suppress the rising, but naturally when the lads saw them, they retreated back along. Okay. And then the local district inspector came here and he met with Peter Paul Galligan in the barracks, and he was handed a notice to say that the volunteers had surrendered up in Dublin. And then he gave him a pass to go to Enniscorthy. The volunteers didn't believe him, so they escorted to the officers where they met with Pierce in prison. he directly gave him orders and said, look, we tried, like, but it's time to surrender. But he said to him in secret, hide the guns, we'll need them another time. And they came back down here and they disbanded. Then they left Ferns. So Ferns was one of the few locations that was occupied for a couple of days outside of Dublin, but the tricolour was flown here as well as in Escorty as well. There's 2 witness statements which describe seeing the tricolour flying from the RIC barracks.
Wow.
So, and they put a monument here to it in 1916. It's a nice simple little monument. But they put it here because this, you can see the flagpole as well, this is where the barracks was. So it's just a short one here. This was carved by a local stonemason, Tommy Martin. He did it all by hand. So you've heard of 1916 and the War of Independence now, but the Civil War, there was fierce fighting in Wexford here as well. So I want you to take this photograph. I'll look behind it.
Oh wow. That's the Garda barracks in the background.
Yeah. And this is another one. You can see the church spire in the background. So that building is a building beside it, actually, beside the RSC barracks.
Okay.
And if you match them up, like the chimneys and all still match. So it's nice to be able to stand here and look at that.
Yeah.
But the X on that man there, that man was a man by the name of Doyle, and he was actually killed coming out of Mass in Enniscorthy in October that same year. Himself and another man by the name of Doyle. But to give you a bit of background on all that then, Wexford was largely controlled by anti-treaty forces at the outbreak of the Civil War. There was only 2 exceptions to this. One was a garrison in Enniscorthy. They were control of the RSC barracks there, and they went on to control the castle. And also there was a garrison here inside in Ferns. They were billeted inside in what was the post office at the time, and I believe the barracks here too. Now, the fighting broke out in Dublin late June. Fast forward a bit to early July, I think it was the 2nd of July, and fighting broke out in Enniscorthy town. Anti-treaty forces started firing on Free State forces, and fighting didn't break out here in Ferns until maybe several days afterwards. So on the 5th of July, this is a map I've done out. So you see the green locations. They're the areas that were occupied by the Free State forces. So you have the post office here. They put a machine gun on top of the surviving tower of the Norman Castle. Okay. So you had a big view all around. And they also occupied what was Bulger's and Dunn's, which is now where Daybreak and Doyle's Bar is, just up the road today. Anti-treaty forces occupied some lower places lower on the town. But the newspapers describe it well. They said how people just left the village. They were in fear of their life, basically. Right. And you come across comical references as well, because it says there was a man by the name of Lawler who had been bedridden for several years, but suddenly made a miraculous recovery and got up and left. But they arrived here in the town. They left then on, I think it was a few days or a day or two before the fighting broke out. And I believe that was because you had a lot of, a couple of lads from Tipperary and Dublin who come down from the Four Courts, ended up in Enniscorthy. And then they arrived back here. And at 8 o'clock in the morning, the fighting broke out. A soldier, Free State soldier who was on top of the castle, a man by the name of Matthew Pender, right. He was shot and wounded. There was a priest here at the time, Kinsella. It's sort of coincidental how he ended up here, really, because technically he shouldn't have been in the village. He was local, but he was only newly ordained, and 2, he was just here doing a replacement for another priest. Yeah. So he found himself in the midst of it all, and he went up to give aid to the wounded soldier, and he was actually shot and wounded himself. So there was a truce called so that they could bring down the injured. He later passed away from his wounds, Matthew Pender. The newspaper accounts at the time, he was local, he was from just outside the village. And the newspaper accounts at the time say that he left behind a wife and 2 children. But then if you read the pension applications afterwards, there was a bit of question as to was he married or not, and it kind of gives a good idea of what it was like at the time. You know, to be unmarried and have 2 kids in Ireland back in the early 1900s, yeah. difficult situation, like. But he was a local man and he was injured in it. And it's interesting because he was probably, when you look at the Norman Castle, of all the warfare and everything that happened there over the years, he was probably one of the last people to be killed up there.
Okay.
And then they came, they occupied the town, the anti-treaty forces, and what essentially happened then was, for a day or two afterwards, the anti-treaty forces had control of more all of Wexford. But with the downfall of the Four Courts, the Free State got control again. They started to move down south. When they sort of had almost like a scorched earth policy. They didn't want to leave anything behind for the lads. Like in Arklow or RIC barracks, before they moved out of the town, they burnt the barracks there. It was the same here in the village. They set fire to the RIC barracks. The same in the courthouse in Enniscorthy, which was the anti-treaty forces HQ. They set fire to that. And they took the slates off of the RIC barracks. They were going to set fire to the castle, only for the intervention of 2 local priests. Thankfully, we still have that to this day. Like,
yeah.
But there's a man by the name of Francis Carty, and he gives an account and his witness statement about the Civil War in Wexford. And it's interesting because when they took those accounts from the survivors, it was still a taboo subject. You know, you didn't have to go in. It ended with the truce. And in Wexford, you only get a couple of references. Maybe a lad said, I was out for 2 weeks in the Civil War and I was arrested. Francis Carty is the only one of over 50 references that gives a full, real good account of it. And he was here in Ferns at the time. They were after demolishing a bridge further out towards Camolan, and they came back in here, and there was about 39 to nearly 40 of them occupying the barracks here. And one of the lorries actually broke down, so they sent some men out to go and try to look for a replacement. And they were inside in the town here when all of a sudden, coming up the street, if I can find it now, the Free State convoy arrived into the town. But before they actually arrived in, they sent in a Crossley tender. The name that was attached to this, okay, it's hard to make it out there now, but that was the same one that he references, like. So that's the actual tender that arrived here in the town. So if you imagine you're here 102 years ago nearly enough, the lads are occupying the building there. He describes it vividly, how there's 3 or 4 of them standing guard outside of the entrance into what was the post office.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden now, you don't have many vehicles, a lot of people are after leaving the town. You hear this motor car coming up the hill here, and there was lads with rifles looking out those 2 end gable windows, and the Free Staters called on the anti-treaty force to surrender. They refused, and all hell broke loose. They absolutely peppered the building.
Right.
The lads down in the front were injured, and they decided at that stage there's no point in trying to fight these lads. They may surrender. They had artillery and everything, like. And then they came in, they arrested them, they temporarily put them in the schoolhouse there. And then the pictures that you have in your hand there, that's the aftermath of it when they arrived here in the town. So in early July, essentially you had Enniscorthy and Ferns. There's a bit of fighting inside the town. One of the casualties, there was other casualties in Enniscorthy as well. But there was one in Ferns here, was a man with the name of Matthew Pender. I said he was young at the time, I think he was only 29 I believe. So a very young man, local man to the area as well. And that's the Civil War in Ferns, anyway.
Absolutely, yes.
So that was forged more recently, but it's a good example of what would have been in the Brown Bess or the muskets. I said they did a big study of that in Vinegar Hill in recent years, the Longest Day project. There's a book published on it. And if you're ever around Ferns or local, visit the 1798 centre inside in there, and you'll hear the whole story.
Okay.
And they were able to trace, based upon where these were, they were able to zap in where the locations of them, and you can see the actual lines. They make out the firing lines as they were moving up the hill. And what really hits home is that some of them were actually impacted. So they had hit something. So possibly they could have hit a person or I don't know, an animal or an object, and fall to the ground and being found upwards of 225 years, over 200 years later, like.
Right.
So, but you could imagine something like this hitting you. And one of the reenactors was telling me there are a wealth of information that if this didn't kill you, what happened was it would take any of your clothing or anything in with the impact.
Oh,
And if
wow,
you,
it wouldn't go through the clothes, like, yeah.
but if you imagine this being embedded inside you,
Yeah, sure, it's not sharp, like. There's
no,
point on
it's
it.
not like an ordinary bullet. And this flattens on impact. It's made out of lead. And as that goes in, it probably takes any clothing or anything with you. And even if you get the musket ball out, this is the time before antibiotics. If you had a bit of dirt in your clothes or something like that, very easily possible that your wound could get infected.
Yeah.
So they're a nasty, nasty thing to be hit with. And if you imagine like grape shot, you'd
Yeah,
have
yeah.
D's and loads of them inside a cannon, like. So it was the tower there, or partly in the tower, that Matthew Pender and another Free State soldier were stationed with a machine gun. Now they were, the anti-treaty forces occupied a couple of buildings down the lower end of the town, but if you're on top of that tower you have a full view all around. The only other vantage point really in the village at the time was either down at the bottom tower of the Church of Ireland or over across the road at the Catholic Church. So that's where we are standing now, roughly thereabouts. So this building here is those two end buildings there, and the tower was at the back of that. So the church was demolished sometime in the late 1900s, and the new church was built in its place further on down below. But there was anti-treaty soldiers stationed inside, snipers, and they're possibly firing back and forth.
Okay.
And Pender was wounded. The local priest at the time, Kinsella, came in. He was also wounded trying to give aid. A temporary truce was called. The newspapers say a lot of villagers used the time to leave the newspapers say the newspapers say that the villagers used that time to get out of the town as well during it. But he was taken to Enniscorthy Hospital and he died of his wounds shortly afterwards. I think it was 1953 to Father Murphy. You'd wonder why that year, because it doesn't really coincide with any of the rebellion events, but then you see that he was born in 1753.
So it's 200-year anniversary for him.
Yeah. So it says, proud great remembrance of Father John Murphy, Bull of Oak, who led the brave men of North Wexford and died with them for the sacred cause of civil and religious liberty in the insurrection of 1798, and is erected by the people of parish of Ferns, his birthplace, born in Curry, 1753, and he died in Tullow, 1798. Here is the monument to him. So this is put up in 1998 to mark the centenary. So nearby is the birthplace of Father John Murphy, and the flagstone you see in the bottom, that was taken from the Whitty homestead. So his mother was a Whitty, and she was from the town in Towngarrows, just on the other side of the Slaney. And you can see maybe down the laneway, but the 1830s or 40s map, the laneway is actually on it, but the house isn't on it. So the laneway that you're looking at now, probably more than likely, it's on the maps from 30, 40 years on after 1798. So there's a good possibility that this laneway was probably the original entrance down to the house.
Right.
Now, the local man remembers there being told that there was a lot of other houses along this laneway as well. But after 1798, I think the area suffered an awful lot. There's a crossroads down that we just came through to get here from Ferns. It's known as Tinkerstown. And the story goes that they got that name because after 98 there was people left their home and everything else for fear, or maybe even just prior to the rebellion, and they gathered at the crossroads and they got that name and they sort of set up camp there.
Right.
But you were talking a bit about family history. I found out a bit of my own family history. It was only a few years ago. There was always a story in the family of a lad by the name of Peter Lacey, and he was killed in the Battle of Arklow, but he was from the townland of Tincurry. Now I can't make the exact connection because there's a gap of a couple of decades between the records of 1798 and the early 18 or mid 1800s, but it was actually interesting because I can't remember the surname of the guy that wrote the bit of the history on Peter Lacey, but the townland where he was from and his surname matches that of a Lacey woman from Tincurry who left a family home and actually married into a farm over there. So more than likely the same people. So can't say the direct link of what Peter Lacey was to me, but same surname, same townland, that connection is sort of a nice bit of history.
And so he's from this townland somewhere?
Yeah, somewhere. I don't know where exactly the house was now, but the story was that he met him after the Harrow somewhere over near Enniscorthy and went on and fought and was killed in the Battle of Arklow. But it's very, very peaceful here. If you're here on a summer's day as well, it's one of the nicest places in Wexford because you can see the Black Stairs and all the mountains on, like. So we farmed over 70 acres. So it had a good holding as well, like. And like we're only a stone's throw from Ferns, and if you were to walk from Ferns, if you walk through the field, there's a couple of old mass paths, and you'll get there a lot quicker than you would by going the way we came by the road, like.
Really, yeah?
Yeah, it is. And his bodyguard was from over the road as well, actually.
His bodyguard was?
Yeah, James Gallagher, I think was his name. I think he covered him before when you were talking to Colm, but he was captured with him and executed in Tullow. Yeah. But there's a place near here called, it's called the Meetings. It's a sort of a small waterfall, but you could easily cross over from one end of the Slaney to the other in low tide during the summer, and sure, his house is more or less just on the opposite side of it, like. But I can take you over and show you. There's a memorial stone to where he is actually from there as well.
Okay,
so.
Great.
Simple enough memorial. It was, again, it was put up in 1998. There's no indication or sign of where his house actually was. There's no ruins or anything, but
they just know it was on this town.
It was on this, in this general area. There's the local parish journal. They have a bit of a history on it, and they kind of got through local folklore that there was a laneway somewhere along here. There's a couple of houses, and that's where the Gallagher family lived.
Could have been anywhere in that field or anything.
Could have been. And if you look over across the way then, that bit of a hill over beyond with the forestry. Yeah. Father Murphy's homestead is on the opposite side of that.
Okay.
And the Meetings where I talked about the easy area, sort of the cross between the waters, it's somewhere along the stretch of the Slaney here where the valley is.
Okay.
So they weren't too far from each other really. The only obstacle between them was the river.
Yeah.
And then Father Murphy's mother's home place, she was a Whitty. That farmstead was about maybe about a mile and a half just up the road here on the left hand side as well.
This road?
Up this road, yeah. There's DN80 just between Scarwelsh, Enniscorthy and Bunclody. Okay. So they're all close by to each other.
Yeah, okay. All from Ferns? All
from Ferns, yeah. Although you're in a different parish now.
Is this different parish?
Different parish now.
Okay.
So this is Marshallstown, Castledocker parish.
Right.
Over that side then, different parish, different hurling team. So, bit of rivalry. So put up by the local development group in 2013, Ballycarney Development Group, and it was at the crossroads here on the 26th of May. There was three brothers, Pat, John and Moog. There's 5 brothers in the family altogether, from a farm not too far from here, and some of the brothers were working away, but they all came home when the rebellion broke out, probably after hearing what happened in Kildare and everything else. And this is sort of at a time when there's a lot of people killings occurring, like in Carnew. There were several people that were thought to be United Irishmen that were killed near the castle. You had Dunlevin Green. It's all around the same time. But 3 of them, the 3 brothers that you see there mentioned, were up on a hill at the back of the house, and they could see a good distance around, and they saw the cavalry coming from Bunclody, led by a Captain Carr, and they could see the houses being burned off in the distance. the smoke rising, and they said that they were coming down the road near him, and they ended up being called down upon, and they walked with him, and it says that there was no danger or anything like that. It said they actually knew some of the yeomen pretty well, and then all of a sudden when they got here, Captain Carr ordered them to be shot. This caught a lot of the yeomen off by surprise apparently. They were sort of shocked by it, and he said, let the man that doesn't shoot them be shot. So with that then, it was kind of kill or be killed. So they shot one of the brothers through the heart. He dropped dead. That was John, I believe. And Pat made a dart for the bridge. It's just over the road here. He was just on the other side of the Slaney, about to jump over the stone wall, and one of the yeomen chased him down and got him with a sword. He was killed, and then Moog was shot in the fleshy part of the thigh, and he fell to the ground. But as he fell, he was wearing a thick leather jacket. He put up his hand in defence because one of the lads went at him with a sword, and it blunted the blow. So he bleeded out. Not enough that he died, but enough that the lads believed he was dead. So he played dead for his own life, and he managed to survive, went on and he fought in the Battle of Hackettstown. He said he was injured there and one of his brothers brought him home. Right. And he lived into old age, had a family, and the last remnant surname, that died out probably the early 1900s, but there's relatives or descendants of him still living in the area today. So. And then the next day after this, there was a local house magistrate by the name of Turner, Woodview House over in Ballingale, that was raided for arms. There was a mob, but when you look at the two of them together, like, it happens after what happened here. So this probably incited a lot of rage and everything else. And Turner's house was burned to the ground. He was killed, and there was several local people that he got to defend the house as well, and they were piked to death. So there was an awful lot happening along this area, the Slaney Valley, in 1798. But again, you can see it's sort of all linked. And actually there was, back in 1998, there was a local man around Killan brought out a book on Kelly from Killan, and he looked at the parish records, and there they go back to nearly the 1700s, and there's a surname Redmond, and he thinks actually that the brothers were related to John Kelly from Killan possibly.
Oh, okay.
So that's an interesting link between the two.
Yeah.
So I have a commemoration here. We unveiled a monument in 2023, and we had a small commemoration here in 24 as well. We just laid a reed from.